Hello, everybody. I'm Eshan Pokhrel. Welcome back to the PB Political Podcast. This is episode 17. No guests today. Today's just going to be a short episode where I recap some of the biggest events from the past week or so in the political world, and also just what to expect from them moving forward, how they really impact the United States and the world moving forward. Cam's not available today, but he will be back next week for our episode with a special guest next week, which will be out next Monday, August 15th. So I want to start with the news from Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan, going to Asia, I believe Singapore and Malaysia, in addition to Taiwan. That was last week. That was a big. The world held their breath there for a little bit. I saw it all over Twitter. China did threaten to strike down Nancy Pelosi's plane if she did land on the island. Now, obviously, if that happened, we'd probably all be dead through nuclear war by now, but thankfully nothing came of that threat. However, China has been ramping up military exercises in the Taiwan Strait around the island in the last few days. They've always been doing exercises near the strait for a couple decades now, but they're really showing their force. The People's Liberation Army is really just ramping up exercises as fears of an invasion of Taiwan, where I believe over 90% of the semiconductors in the world are made. I don't know if that's an exact number. It might not even be right, but the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is they do control a large amount of semiconductor production in the world. Taiwan, they're strategically important to the whole rest of the world, and China too. They do sell a lot of their chips to China, their semiconductors to China, but again, the United States also relies a lot of the West relies on these semiconductors. So obviously, any invasion from China would be detrimental to the interests of the West, especially now that Congress passed the Bipartisan Chips and Sciences Act, which will boost our manufacturing capability of these chips and return factories to the United States in states like Ohio, Texas, Georgia, I believe. But that has a 10-year rollout plan, so obviously anything that happens now, the CHIPS Act won't be able to offset the damage of any issues in Taiwan, any closure of the strait, which could really just handicap the entire world market in a week and for maybe years. So not a good situation there. Nancy Pelosi, she went over there. President Biden was not very happy of her move. Actually, I believe he encouraged her not to go. But she did go. She landed. She met with the Taiwanese president, whose name escapes me. Tsai Ing-wen. So they met. I'm not too sure about the discussions, but I'm sure it's centered around the threat of China to both the United States and to Taiwan. And China keeps threatening the United States. This is obviously a catastrophe for the world if anything comes of these threats from either side. But right now everything looks good there. It's obviously escalating. Hopefully there's no show of real force, but there are reports that invasion could come within the next 18 months of the island, which is founded by escaped nationalists from China who escaped the communists during the Communist Revolution in, I believe, the 50s, maybe the late 40s with Mao. So that's the first thing I want to cover. It's a little short, not really a comprehensive history of the island and its issues, but just a little bit of a overview to really just not set the stage, but just kind of give an overview of what's going on there, as it looks to be the next big battleground in the world, if not literally then figuratively, through diplomacy and everything. So China and Taiwan, number one. Number two, big movement in the Senate as they approve the Inflation Reduction Act, which is essentially a healthcare, climate, and tax bill. This is essentially President Biden's Build Back Better agenda. This is a central piece of that. And the it was obviously held up for a long time. It was almost essentially killed by Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. But after the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, which was very bipartisan, Senator Manchin went to Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's office, completely secret, and a few hours later they came out with a agreement on the Inflation Reduction Act, which Republicans were obviously not a fan of, as they were promised that that would be killed in favor of the CHIPS Act. So 50-50 vote in the Senate, broken by Vice President Kamala Harris, make it 51-50. There was accompanying this passage was a huge vote-a-rama where all the senators can throw in amendments, throw in what they want to add into the bill. They'd be voted down, voted up into the bill. I don't think much actually was voted in. One thing that did happen was Kyrsten Sinema, senator from Arizona. She almost broke with the rest of the Democratic caucus if she didn't get her tax, essentially, so not a tax cut, but sort of an enclave for Wall Street and tech, that sort of businesses, to satisfy. Yeah, so as the Washington Post says, to satisfy Sinema, party leaders repeatedly dialed back their proposed tax policies, particularly those targeting wealthy investors. So Sinema essentially saved a lot of wealthy investors on Wall Street, anywhere else, from having to pay the proposed high tax rate. But, in the end, a lot of this bill centers around climate, and there's a lot of tax credits for installing solar panels is a big one, installing clean energy into your house, buying electric vehicles, a lot of ways to really incentivize moving towards electric vehicles, electric clean energy in general. So a lot of proponents have been very positive of the bill, despite the last second grab from Sinema to keep a little bit more money in Wall Street's pockets. At the end, Bernie Sanders came in with a lot of, I saw this on Twitter, on the a lot of votes coming in from a lot of proposed amendments, I should say, from Bernie Sanders that were trying to really just add back everything. So pre-K, universal pre-K was in the original bill, but it was cut to appease Senator Manchin, Sinema, and the Republicans. Paid family and medical leave, that was cut. Those are the big ones that were cut. Bernie Sanders tried to add those back into the bill at the end. Those were voted down. So that was big. This is basically the tail end, what looks to be the tail end of a really pretty good couple weeks for the Democrats and President Biden, with the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act, which just incentivizes manufacturing in the United States. Hopefully it brings a bunch of good, steady factory jobs and any jobs back to the U.S. in these areas where they left 20, 30 years ago, in the Rust Belt, Texas, anywhere really. And the Honor Our PACT Act, which was championed by Jon Stewart, the former host of The Daily Show, which gives more funding to the VA, Veterans Affairs Department, to help veterans that have toxic burn pit cancers, rare cancers from that, for burn pit victims. That we're not getting the same care. Not the same care, but had to go through a lot of hoops to get the money for this care, or really anything in that regard. That was voted down at first in retribution for the Inflation Reduction Act, for that coming back to the fray. This was originally voted down. I think some of the Senator Tester of Montana said that it came down to discretionary against. It was some funding issue essentially in the end, but it passed. A lot of outrage from the public. Jon Stewart was on Capitol Hill the day of the passage, and he was very excited about that, since he's been championing this for a while. He really brought this issue to the national spotlight. So it is a good bill. I think that it's really good. It's good for veterans to get the care that they need, and it's good that it passed with wide support. It's like over 80 yes votes and only 11 no's. I think it was 84 to 11 officially. So that's just a little bit of update on Congress. A lot of, President Biden hasn't had a great couple years in office. His approval's at around 39% on average. But these last few weeks have been very good for him. We'll see if that gives him a bump in approval. I don't think it's looking like it will. But these three bills have the potential to do good for a vast majority of people. So let's see if they can completely. So the CHIPS Act went to the two of them have already went through Congress, and President Biden signed them. The Inflation Act, has to go through the House, where it looks like it'll pass, and then it will go to his desk where he will obviously sign it. So good news for him as the midterms come around and Democrats look positioned to lose, if not a majority, then a large number of their seats in both houses. Maybe not the Senate. So yeah, it's a little update on Congress. And the last one, something really interesting from Kansas. We wrote about this on our Instagram, PB Political AL, but also I want to talk about it here because this is really interesting. So Kansas had their primary last Tuesday, August 2nd, and on the ballot was a constitutional amendment that basically, because the actual text was very confusing just to read. It's odd, but the essential breakdown is that a yes vote for this amendment would have given the state lawmakers a ability to change the abortion laws in the state of Kansas. A no vote would give keep that power with the 2019 Supreme Court ruling, a Kansas Supreme Court ruling that said Kansans, they have a right to bodily autonomy, and that extends to abortion. So it would keep that precedent going in the state. And in a fairly surprising turn, 59% of voters said no, they don't want lawmakers to have a say in abortion and if they can outlaw abortion. So Kansas is about it's a heavy Republican state. President Trump carried Kansas in 2020 easily. I'm trying to pull up the actual map. He carried it by 15 points, so R15. Nothing to sneeze at there, because that's President Biden only won 5 counties in the state, so it wasn't even close. It never was close. So it is interesting to see that abortion, which is it's interesting because you'd think, in theory, just on the surface, that Kansas would be completely fine with switching this and voting yes on this bill, and to let them outlaw abortion. However, this is a 59-41 is actually a bigger margin than President Trump beat Biden by. So what Kansas has said is that they actually value their right to privacy and to abortion more than they actually like President Trump over President Biden. And it wasn't just urban counties that really carried this, although most of these urban counties did vote resoundingly to keep the Supreme Court ruling of 2019. There were a lot of rural counties out there in Kansas. I'm not too familiar with Kansas, but counties like Osage County, Franklin, and Lyon County, they all voted no, pretty big margins. I think what this comes down to is just that the campaign for the no votes was amazing. They postured the issue as a freedom, your body, essentially it's really bodily autonomy. They didn't really mention the words abortion. They weren't really talking about the actual act or the morality or anything most people argue with. They're just talking about, do you think the government should be able to regulate what you do with your body? And that messaging really worked in Kansas. As you can see, an 18-point swing is nothing to sniff at in most states. Now, I think this would still, if this was an amendment in other states such as Georgia and Alabama and Texas, I think that, maybe not Texas, but Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Tennessee, I think that this would be a little bit more likely to go to the state lawmakers if there was a similar situation But it is interesting that the Midwest and Kansas, which they do have a Democratic governor, Laura Kelly. So it's a little It's an interesting state for state politics. It's a little bit less nationalized than most states, but it's just an interesting scenario. Really, just watching a very conservative state nationally resoundingly vote to protect the right to abortion on a state level. And I think it's a model that most states. I think that the direct democracy of it, where this is the state constitution, forced them to really just not let the lawmakers restrict or ban or anything without having the constituents of the state have a say first. Makes it really interesting. I think that a lot of other states, because there's other states where this process is required, but it's just an interesting thought to see if you put abortion up on the ballot, not through a candidate, but on the ballot as a topic. It is interesting to see that even a state like Kansas resoundingly protects it, despite their conservative leanings on the national stage. So those are the three topics I really wanted to touch on today. I think we'll be doing more of these sorts of episodes, maybe with Cam, maybe not, but just without a guest, because guest booking is a little tougher than just getting on the mic and just talking about some issues. I think these three issues: Taiwan, obviously, Senate actually passing bills, getting a little bit done, as well as this more state issue of abortion, and just how it's a little different from the rest of the typical conservative and progressive types of votes. I think it's a little interesting. Just want to touch on those things. We'll be back next week with a guest, August 15th. You can find that episode. You'll find that episode everywhere you're listening to this. Anywhere you're listening to this, you'll find that one. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, everything. You can find us on Instagram, PBPoliticalAL, Twitter, same handle, Facebook, same, TikTok, PBPolitical, no AL there, just PBPolitical. Check out our website, pbpolitical.com. Obviously, we've been posting a lot there. A lot of good articles from a lot of good writers. So check those out. And yeah, that's about it. I'm Eshan Pokhrel. Thank you for listening, and see you next week.